internet. Over to you, Tricia.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We have a large group this evening, so just taking a little while for everybody to come into the room. But you are very, very welcome this evening. I think we've got people from as far north as Berwick, as far west as Bolton in the northwest region, and from somewhere down on the south coast, maybe even the islands, part of Southern Islands. So wherever you are, you're very welcome. Particularly welcome, of course, is the Reverend Adrian Roux. I'm so delighted that Adrian accepted the invitation to come and share his expertise and knowledge of the Gospel according to St. Mark. I'm even more delighted that he will share his passion for that Gospel. And I hope that that will challenge us, but also will excite us to look deeper into the Gospel as he takes us through it over the coming weeks. So I'm going to hand over in a moment to Adrian, but just a little bit of practicality. John's mentioned that we're live streaming because there are so many of us. We're offering the option of watching on YouTube on the live stream, and we will record because there are a number of people who can't make all the sessions. So we'll record some of them as well. We'll record all of them as well. If you're particularly concerned about not appearing on the live stream or the recording, if you turn your video camera off, we won't be able to see you. We prefer that everybody didn't because it makes it seem for Adrian as though he's speaking to an empty room. But if you are concerned, do that. And please stay on mute when you're not speaking so that we don't get the background noise. But if you don't want to be heard on the recordings, then of course you'll need to stay on mute throughout. We won't record the breakout rooms. So if you're in a breakout room, you're quite safe there to speak and show your face and join in with the others with you. So Adrian, it's an absolute delight to welcome you this evening. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your understanding of Mark's Gospel with us. I look forward to all that you bring us tonight and in future evenings as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. It really is a pleasure to be with you all, even if I can't see you all on one screen at the same time. It really is. It's good to be here, and I'm excited to be a part of this. I really am, and I'm going to enjoy sharing with you and journeying with you in Mark's Gospel as we find out what it means for us, for today, for here, for your life in this place. I want to jump straight in now and just talk a little bit about Mark's Gospel, and then I'll introduce myself a little more formally later on. The Gospel according to Mark. Of course, it's Mark's Gospel is the clumsy shorthand that we use all the time for what is the Gospel according to Mark. This isn't Mark's good news. This is the good news of Jesus Christ according to Mark. It's widely accepted that Mark wrote this Gospel, the first Gospel ever written in Rome, just before AD 70. It's not a biography. It was never intended to be a biography. It's not pure history. It was never intended to be a history book. It's written in a style called Gospel, and as such, it's an interaction with us about who Jesus is and what that means. And we're going to find some surprises along the way. It's a great story. But there are a lot of surprises along the way. Mark doesn't present a quiet faith. He presents to us a faith that comes up against opposition and is forced at times to take risks. There's no baby Jesus in the story as Mark tells it, and there's definitely no gentle Jesus, meek and mild, anywhere in Mark's Gospel. There's nothing here about Jesus saving us, only this: for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the Gospel will save it. According to Mark, it's not Jesus' role to do something for us, Rather, it's our role to follow Jesus all the way to the end and beyond. It's surprising too that there's very little that is miraculous. In fact, Jesus emphatically rejects a request for a sign. And there's almost no miraculous intervention of God in Mark's gospel. There's a voice from heaven that speaks twice in the story, but when we most expect it, when we're most expecting God to step into history and do something, there's nothing, like at the cross. Mark presents to us Jesus as a person and calls us to understand Jesus first and foremost as a person, completely a person, just a person like you and me. That's really good Christian theology. We've always asserted Jesus was 100% a person, not 50-50, half God, half man, nothing like that. 100% a person. And then the most reassuring thing about Mark's gospel is that as we read the story, we'll realize that the disciples are clueless. They really aren't a great bunch of disciples. They really are these people who are wandering around behind Jesus, kind of admiring him, kind of liking the stuff that he does most of the time, but not really sure of what he's talking about all the time, and actually not that sure that they really want to buy into everything that he says. And yet somehow he's a part of their life and they can't let it go. And I think maybe there's something in that for each of us as disciples, just a word of encouragement along the way that even as we struggle, it might be okay. They fail to grasp that status and privilege and control have no place in this new community of Jesus. And twice in the story, the discipleship thing collapses completely. But in the end, there's an invitation to start again, to start all over again. Mark is just a single voice among many in the New Testament. Luke and Matthew each read what he had done and liked it, really liked it, but they said, yeah, we can do it better. And they revised what Mark had done and tried to do it better. But nonetheless, Mark's gospel stands alone as the original. And as such, it gives us a complete account of the good news of Jesus Christ. One could summarize Mark as saying, discipleship is the only form of faith in Jesus Christ. And perhaps also, we look at Mark 13, true discipleship begins where our old familiar life ends. I'm Adrian Roux. I'm a Methodist presbyter who works in the learning network of the Connectional team. I have a master's degree in theology and development, and I'm on a journey from mystery to understanding and back again. And in that journey, I am passionate about Jesus. I'm passionate about a faith that changes the world, that is the incarnation of God, a faith that is at least as relevant to this world as it is to the next. I'm excited about the Bible. I'm particularly excited about Mark's gospel. I'm excited about the authentic Pauline writings, and I'm excited about understanding Paul and Jesus in the Roman Empire. But this time and the weeks to come is given to you to help and to equip you as leaders, as preachers, and as disciples. And I hope that it will be a real blessing to you, as I'm sure it will be to me. I'm glad to be here. I really am. And I want to say thank you to you for joining us in this journey that I hope will be practical, rewarding, challenging, and at its best is going to be about growing spiritually, about making sense in this world, and about growing closer to our triune God. Somewhere in that, you might have to think and rethink some things. You might have to think and rethink some things that are close to you, but change is a part of growth. In fact, you can't grow without changing. So the plan is for us to oops. The plan is for us to meet on Thursday evenings. You've got those dates. We're going to meet at 7. We're going to finish by 8:15 sharp. On Fridays, there'll be an online sort of coffee group gathering to follow up the conversations that we have tonight, or perhaps to ask further questions. And those links will go out on the evening. And the whole journey of 16 chapters is going to take us about 12 sessions. And all those dates are online. We'll start slowly. We'll only get through a few verses tonight because we want to do some background work as well. But it's an exciting journey that lies ahead. We have to tell you that we're trying something new in this, in that it's a new format in our teaching, that we're on Zoom with what is a really big group. And at the same time, we're streaming it to YouTube. And I hope that we can get it right. I hope we can get it just perfect, and that the technology is not actually apparent at any point. Should that not be the case, just be patient with us. We'll find the tweaks that we need, and we'll make it work. We've spoken about Zoom etiquette. I don't think I need to say anything more there, other than to say I really do want you to speak to me. At its best, this will work as an interaction. And I'm going to ask questions. And when I ask a question, I'm kind of hoping you're going to answer it. I want you to share your insights. I want you to ask your questions, even if at times I have to say no, or I don't know, or it's too big a question to answer here and now. But I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope we can make this journey together well. Can I open in prayer for us? Let's pray. God of love, God for all, your purposes are more beautiful than we can possibly imagine. Fill us with your Holy Spirit. Help us to let go of all that holds us back. Open our lives and our churches to new seasons of humility and faith, of change and growth, and shake us up with the good news of Jesus. Show us your way. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm really keen to just open the Bible and jump into it and get going. And I'm actually, in the back of my mind, I'm a little bit worried that tonight we might actually look at a disappointingly little amount of the gospel. But there are two things that we really need to get right in advance. And I'm hoping we can deal with those first, set a really firm foundation that will take us forward. So we're going to start off, and we're going to have some conversations and some input on two things that are really important. The one is context, and the other is genre, or what we know as the style of the writing. Context and style of writing. Okay, so the first then is context. What do I mean by the context of something? This is the first question where I kind of expecting you to just unmute and give me an answer. Someone help me. What is the context of something?
Where it sits in relation to what's around it, what goes before, what goes after, what the political environment is, who the main characters are. So the bigger picture, I guess, would be a way of describing it.
Great answer, Alan. So the context is the bigger picture. What were the words you used? Everything that surrounds it. And we're talking about a Bible passage at the moment, but we could talk about the context of just about everything. It's that complex environment in which things happen. This mix of society and culture and politics and environment and geography and social structure and economics and all those things that interact with each other and through that influence each other, but influence us as well, and influence our values, and influence our choices, and influence our understanding, and influence the way that we do things. In any specific conversation, some of those parts are going to be more important than others, but it's all around us, the air that we breathe, even when we're not noticing it. That is our context. So tell me about our context. You can just unmute and call out, what is the context of our meeting this evening? Be as specific as you like.
It's 7 p.m. or it was 7 p.m. when we arrived.
We arrived at 7 p.m. You can take it further on the 1st of October. Right.
We're a bunch of people with similar backgrounds.
We're a bunch of people with similar backgrounds. How are those backgrounds similar?
In that I suspect most of us are Methodist.
Right.
And therefore we have got some context relating to one another.
Right. Good.
It's the 21st century in Western Europe.
The 21st century in Western Europe. That's another good example of context. Yes. What else?
It's a particularly difficult time for our country with the COVID-19 restriction.
Right. So COVID-19 is a very real part of...
Yes, it's affecting absolutely every part of people's lives, yeah.
Absolutely. Important part of our context at the moment.
We're all inquisitive and want to learn more.
As a group, we've gathered here. We've chosen to gather here. So we're inquisitive and want to know more. Yeah? We do it.
But for some of us, it's our eye on the world. I'm in isolation at the moment, so it's my only contact with the outside world.
Right, right. And that whole idea of isolation is I mean, really important part of some people's context at the moment. Yeah. Come on. Keep going. Welcome.
Yep, we've all got a basic grasp of technology. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
In some way, all of us are curious about the person of Jesus Christ.
Right. What about global environmental degradation that is happening around us? Is that a part of our context? Yeah.
Yeah.
The American elections, does that affect us? Does Donald Trump affect us?
Yes, yes.
That's a part of our context then.
Yeah.
We all come from different personal circumstances.
Right, Susie? Yeah. Massive fires in California, Brazil, and South Africa. Many people struggling and working from home. Ask me about that tonight, yeah? We live in a post-Christian country. It's autumn. The Methodist Church feels itself under pressure of shrinking and financial pressures at the moment. Rising conservatism, migrant crisis, radical right-wing politics, Tory government. All those things paint a picture of who we are and what is our thinking and what are the things that are affecting us at the moment. Okay.
We're very fortunate.
We're very fortunate. Say a bit more.
We have more than one change of clothes. We have food. We have clean water. We have clean air. Or cleaner air.
Yeah.
We have,
and that's a reasonable
medical
presumption for us who are in the room.
We have access to medical help. We're very, very blessed.
But we live in a context where the gap between the wealthy and the poor, or the haves and the have-nots, or however you want to express it, the gap both in our own country and in the world is growing wider and wider and wider. Also part of our context. what we're going to do now is John's going to magically invite you into breakout groups. And in your groups, I want you to share everything that you know about the context in which Jesus lived. Okay, so we're going to now talk about the context in which Jesus lived. You'll have about 7 minutes, which isn't terribly long. And then when we get back together, we'll just share the main thoughts, just the headlines. You'll have to listen carefully because we don't want to repeat what someone else has said. And we'll just try and paint a picture of Jesus' context like we've just painted of our own context. Is that okay? You're going to receive an invite to join a breakout room. You just click on it and
it should. So folks, I think you're going to go straight into a breakout room. We're going to give you 5 minutes of regular time, and then it's going to say you've got a 2-minute countdown. Use every second of that 2-minute countdown before you come back into the room. Have great conversations. We'll see you in a bit. For those of you on YouTube, everyone is going to go into their breakout rooms. And then it will just be myself for 5 minutes. And Adrian's going to come back out, and it's just me and I speaking to YouTube and the 5 wonderful people who are watching live. Folks, if you are watching on our blog, then that is great. We're so glad that you are there. You can also watch us on YouTube, and there you can interact with us live. So do type something into the comments of our YouTube stream if you want to get in touch with Adrian and ask a question. You're not so far behind that you'll ask questions out of context, so do chime in. Here we go. I just realised, Adrian, that it's a little bit like live TV in that you just got to keep going. There's no like chat in between the breaks. You just got to keep going.
Just have to keep going so people know what's happening. No, we haven't switched off.
Yeah.
I was thinking the one thing I should say, you could have said to the YouTube folk in particular, it would be great if you were just to put in the comments, if nothing else, just where you are watching, watching the stream from. That would be great. Absolutely. Sometimes we get some lovely exotic places, and it's always good to know. Exotic places like Cornwall, and we've had Delhi before, and there was someone from Barbados, I think, who came to Barbados. I think we've had Pakistan as well. All over the world. We should wonderful is try and get like a little world map and then stick a pin everywhere we've had, in the country, and see whether we can get every country in the world. So if you're watching from the Federated States of Micronesia, please put a comment, and we will stick a little pin in the capital, which is the island of Yap. You're hoping you're going to get an invite to go and visit them, isn't that? Yes, yeah. That would be, oh man, that would be cool. Yeah, the capital, it's on the island of Yap. Ponape, I can't remember, I don't know. The only reason I know that is because of an episode of The West Wing. Okay. So only episode I remember from The West Wing was the thing with the goldfish. Oh, yeah. Actually biscuits in the end, I think. Or yes, yeah. Like I love goldfish, the crackers you can get in the States rather than, Gail. Brian Simpson on YouTube. You're from the Darlington circuit, and we're so glad that you are here. Adrian, Brian is after us talking about, or after you talking about the context of Jesus' time. Mm. So, and I think that's what you're going to focus on this evening. Am I correct? So we're going to get back together now, and we're going to bring together all the bits and pieces of knowledge about the context of Jesus' time, and then maybe once we've done that, then we will talk about why it's important to understand context. I think it goes without saying, but there's some parts of it that are really helpful to pack what is important about understanding the context as we approach particular piece of scripture, because there are a few things that can trip us up along the way. And then after that, the conversation about the genre, the type of writing that gospel writing is, because again, if we, I'll say a bit more, but obviously with any type of writing, you approach it in a particular way. You ask different questions of different types of writing, or you expect to interact with it in a different way. And so if we get those two things right, the context and the genre, then I think we're well on our way to having a smooth trip through Mark's gospel. So yeah.
Even then, Mark has got some peculiarities about himself anyway, doesn't he? He's writing for a particular,
well, every piece of text
is way.
And every piece of writing has an intention behind it. People, particularly in that day, but today, everyone writes for a reason, even if it's a tweet. Someone has responded because they think, or because they want to, or because they believe, or whatever. So if we can get into the mind of the author, then we were able to understand what it meant for him, what it possibly meant for his first audience. And if we can get into that conversation, then perhaps we can take that conversation and understand it in our world today. That's the hope of good exegesis.
That's exciting stuff. We've got just over a minute, about 75 seconds before people come back to their group. Or to our group.
Right.
So Brian and the other folks watching, you've got about another minute. You've got just enough time to go and fill your glass of water up, or if you flick the kettle on, make your cup of tea. And then we will come back. Adrian, would you do we want to do a whiteboard thing at all, or are we just going to have groups shout out?
I thought it would just be a group shout out.
Oh, let's do that. Great. Highly professional outfit, YouTube land. Worked this out to the minute. BBC outside broadcast unit, be afraid.
Yeah, not so sure of that.
Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
Were those good conversations?
Yep.
Yes.
Discover that you actually know quite a lot about Jesus' context?
Yeah.
Good. Who wants to tell us a few things about the context Jesus lived in?
I think the last thing we were talking about was not having books to refer to or papers. So you had to learn things that people have said and tell to somebody, and they would tell to someone else, or you would discuss with them.
Right. Definitely an oral culture, and people who wrote were few and far between. And the process of committing something to writing was not something that you did casually. So there's no doubt that Mark's gospel was a carefully crafted piece of work, and likely not written by one guy called Mark, but likely written by a team or a church of people who worked together through a whole lot of iterations and these oral stories to put together exactly what they wanted to say. And they would have chosen each word, each image as carefully as they possibly could. Yeah. Other things about Jesus' context.
In the Roman Empire, they were under control of a foreign body, but the Romans actually kept a lot of did a lot of good things by keeping the peace, by creating a road system which enabled communications to happen much more easily than they might otherwise have done.
Right, and the fact that this all happens in the Roman Empire is often overlooked, but is a real part of the context. They were living in an occupied land by a foreign force who would let them get on with their things on the whole, so long as it was peaceful and they paid their taxes. Nevertheless, there was this grudge. Yeah. What else?
Religion was a big part of the culture for the Jews, certainly centered on the temple in Jerusalem, sacrifices, the law, the Old Testament, and yeah, a big part of their identity. Absolutely, huge part of their identity. Yeah. And they were a Jewish country, sorry, Paul, they were a Jewish country largely surrounded by Gentile countries and still with this Roman occupation, which was also not Jewish. Paul?
There was the fact that they, for centuries, had been expecting a Messiah.
Right, they were expecting, within the religion, they were expecting a Messiah, and that Messiah was wasn't so much a spiritual leader, although you couldn't really separate it, but was expected as someone who was going to transform the country's fortunes, a political leader, or a social leader, if you like. Yeah. What else?
Any misfortune that befell you was looked upon as you'd done something sinful.
Right.
And there would be consequences.
Right. So anything that was bad in the world was to do with sin. I think that's, we'd still say that's the case. But they felt that there was a very one-on-one association with it, that if I sinned, I would be punished. If I sinned, my family would be punished. Now, if we look at the world around us, sometimes we know it's not like that, that sometimes my sinfulness actually produces bad consequences for other people as well. But yeah, really important. So things like poverty and illness and disability, in particular, those three were ascribed to either the person or their family's sinfulness and the cause of that. And on the flip side, if everything was going swimmingly with you, that was because you were such a wonderful person and God just had to bless you. That was
at the same time as the religion, there was a small offshoot with John the Baptist that we said. So there's a small group having baptism in the river, and there's a prophecy. So there's already a little small group that are looking for something more.
And John is big. I mean, he's got this revival movement going, I suppose, is the right sense for it. And actually, the early, at the time, lots of people were saying John the Baptist is the Messiah. So much so that we actually see Mark to a lesser extent, but John, of John's gospel, spends about half of the first chapter just saying John was not the Messiah, Jesus is the Messiah, John the Baptist was not the Messiah, on and on and on. Yeah, but there is this sense of something has to change, and John is a part of that. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
We're talking about an agrarian society where most people live very much from day to day. As indeed in the pre-industrial revolution they did in this country.
So at its best, most people were farmers or fishermen. Farmers produced wheat, produced bread. Fishermen fished on the lakes and produced provided food for the communities like that. But on the whole, people living from hand to mouth on a sort of annual basis. If there was a crop failure one year, there just wasn't the resource to carry you through and keep you going. And so more and more people were being bought out by the rich, and you would have land that wasn't being farmed, being held by the people in the towns, and a growing urban poor.
Families tended to be big.
Sorry, what tended to be big, Anne?
Families.
Families.
The families were big and lived together in a lot of communal dwellings. And the role of women was very much below that of men in terms of schooling and perception.
Right, two very important things there. The importance of family. So you were always understood in your family. Isn't this the child of, or isn't this the child of that? Your skills and your hope for the future would come from what the family had, either in terms of land or in terms of skills. And part of protecting all of that was about honor, about making sure that we kept the name of the family held in good regard. The other thing Anne mentioned was about the place of women in society. And yes, it was a hugely patriarchal society. Women were almost invisible in society. You couldn't own land, you couldn't talk to people you didn't know in public. There was so much that was there to put women to one side or to push them down or to keep them to one thing.
Slaves were referred to as talking furniture.
Right, okay. And of course, Roman Empire, so slavery was a big part of what was happening as well. So, heavy taxation, a growing gap between rich and poor, politicians on their own mission without regard to the people, this elite superclass of landowners, civil servants on the tax collectors on the take, most people's experience of life, this daily grind of poverty, trying to keep body and soul together in an increasingly oppressive and hopeless condition. Sounds vaguely familiar, but that is the context of Jesus' day. That's the real life, real culture background that we've got to understand if we're going to understand the passages of scripture that are in front of us. Somewhere in that, maybe we find our own story too. But the reason we're having this conversation is because context is critical to understanding words and images. Context is critical if we're going to understand what a text is saying or what it is about, because the context can change the meaning completely. I want to give you just two examples of that. The first is when a botany lecturer gives a flower to a student. The question is obviously, can you identify it? Or how does this plant grow? Or how does this work? When the same flower is given to the same person over dinner on a moonlit night, the context changes and the meaning changes and the symbol changes, and suddenly this is about who are we or what does this mean? In the one instance, the interest is in the flower as an item. In the other, it's a message, it's a symbol, it's what is it? The item itself becomes secondary to the conversation because context determines meaning. No words happen all on their own. They always happen in the context of a time and a place and a history and a culture. And it's those things that give meaning to the words. The things in the text, like words and images, are also not as, they're far more fluid than we would believe. So there's an apocryphal story that is told that illustrates the shift in the meaning of words over time. Apparently, during the construction of St. Paul's Cathedral, the monarch of England was taken on a tour of the edifice by Sir Christopher Wren. And when the excursion was complete, the monarch turned to Wren and said to him that the new building was awful, it was artificial, and it was amusing. And Wren did not feel insulted at all, but was greatly pleased because in the 1600s, awful meant something like we would understand awe-inspiring. And artificial meant something closer to what we would understand by the word artistic. And amusing was something like amazing. Now, the story might be apocryphal. It might not be exactly historical, but the point that it gives us, that context affects our understanding. Context determines meaning, and that is true. Texts are written and tied into a particular place. And if we're going to understand the text, we need to understand the text in its own context. What did the author mean? And what did the first hearers mean and understand when they heard it? The context determines the meaning. Can you see that? Text and context. Text and context.
Yes.
They're always having a conversation with each other. And in a sense, it's backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And in that backwards and forwards, there's a message. There is the actual message of the text, how it's understood in its own context. When we understand that message, then we can take it on. Then we've exegeted the passage successfully and got the message from the passage. Then we can take that message and we can apply it in our own life or in our own situation, and we've found the real meaning that is there. When we try to take the text straight to our own context, and we miss this important conversation of the text in its own context, then what we have is eisegesis. Then we have a situation where we put our own thoughts or our own meaning onto that passage. If we're going to come to the heart and meaning of that conversation, that's what we listen for. That's what we're trying to understand. Does that make sense? That's the importance of context. We have to get text into its own context. The second thing is that we're going to talk about, remember I said at the beginning, text, context and genre. Now, genre is the fancy word for what style of writing is this? So same thing, just give me an example of different styles of writing. Just unmute and tell me one.
Poetry.
Poetry. How do we recognize a poem? When we see a poem, how do we recognize it?
Lines.
Yeah. Right, typically.
The structure, and it takes one idea maybe and talks about that idea for the whole poem.
Excellent. Right. Okay. Another style of writing.
Letter writing.
A letter writing. Easy one to recognize, hey? It often starts with dear whoever and says at the bottom, lots of love or whatever, depending what kind of letter, because there are actually different kinds of letters. Maybe we've got a place where we say where we are and that sort of thing, but we recognize a letter quite easily, yeah. What other types of writing?
Storytelling.
A story or a novel, right. Yeah.
Factual.
Say that again.
Say that again.
Factual.
Factual.
Historical.
A historical thing, okay? So we might find that in an encyclopedia or in a journal article, something like that. A graphic novel, yeah?
Telephone directory.
What was that?
Right. So with all of those, there are advertisements as well, propaganda, news reports, infomercials, sermons, biographies, fairy tales, okay, all types of writing. And what we have there is the text is presented in a particular way with a particular purpose. And it's critical to understand what type of writing this is if we're going to take it seriously. We can't interact appropriately with it if we don't know what kind of writing it is. We wouldn't look to a fairy tale and expect to find scientific insight, nor would we be surprised that a journal article isn't aesthetically pleasing. We would place more value on the facts from a journal article, though, than we might for the facts from an infomercial or novel. So one genre might be better entertainment than another. Context determines meaning, but genre affects what is the appropriate interaction to have with that text. Now, gospel is also a genre of writing. It's not biography and it's not history. Gospel is a genre all on its own. Gospel was the style of media delivery in the Roman Empire. The media delivery in the Roman Empire was done via town criers who would go around with gospel through the Roman Empire. The news of victory, the gospel of Caesar, the gospel of the Roman Empire. A gospel was really a technical term for Roman propaganda. And as a style, gospel wove together all kinds of things: allegory, history, contemporary reality, historical archetypes. It was this giant mix of ideas and history and tradition and culture and archetypes and myths and people and events, all blended together with the purpose of conveying a message. Not a biography, not history, but a definite message. So we can imagine Mark listening to the Roman media proclaiming its political propaganda of the greatness and the power of Caesar, how wonderful Caesar is, how blessed you are to be a part of Caesar's empire, and how you better watch out if you don't believe that. Caesar, who they say is just like God, Caesar, who the media is saying is divine, the Son of God. And you can imagine Mark hearing this, and Mark's thinking, nah, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that. Let me tell you about another anointed leader, also, if you like, also Son of God, who proclaims God's kingdom as opposed to Caesar's kingdom. Forget that so-called Roman Empire gospel. Let me tell you, Mark 1, verse 1, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Gospel writing is there to tell us the message of who Jesus is and what it means for you, me, and the world. What it means to be a disciple of Jesus and what it's going to mean to follow him. So we are faced with this wonderful account of Jesus' life, but because we're modern Western thinkers, our thinking still goes in the direction of asking, did it really happen like this? What actually happened? Are these records historical? Is there a scientific explanation? Those type of questions. But Mark and his audience would have understood things completely differently. They would have been asking, what does this mean? Or what does this mean for us? Or what can we learn from this? And we have to shift our thinking in the same direction. Not how did this work, or is this exactly how it happened, but what does this mean? It's about portraying the truth of Jesus rather than the simple history or the simple life of Jesus. Gospel is a style of writing that mixes in history, culture, archetypes, myths, all those things, that is explicitly not biography or history, and is carefully crafted. So as we go through these 16 chapters, look at the detail. You will not find any detail that is not important to the story. You might find the odd bit of detail that you say to me, Adrian, why is that there? And I'd have to say to you, I don't know. But I'm never going to say to you, oh, it doesn't matter. Because every piece of detail, every word is carefully chosen. And because of that, everything that we need to know and understand is included in this account. The only thing that might be excluded are the things that first century readers would have known that we don't know automatically. But the pertinent question is always this: what does it mean? Okay? So let's put aside our preconceived ideas. And let's finally at 5:10 to 8 actually open our Bibles. Put aside your preconceived ideas and listen to the word of God. The story of Jesus is told to us by Mark. Mark chapter 1 verse 1 says, "Listen, and I will tell you, this is the beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God." And we're just going to look at 3 verses, just 3 verses. I'm going to read it to you now. We can read it together, and then we're going to break away into our breakaway rooms again. And I'm going to ask you just to look at the text, just to look at what is in front of you. Don't come with all your theological training, all your theology, all your ideas about God, all your knowledge of Jesus, and try and fix it in here. But rather, let's try and allow this text to speak to us. Is that okay? So you're going to ask questions about the text. What do you see? What do you notice? What seems strange or unusual? And then we apply our minds onto the text, let it speak. And when you come back, we'll list the bits of the text that stood out, and then we'll talk about them. Is that okay? Can we do that, John?
Yeah, Adrian, how long are we putting people into breakout rooms for? How long do we want people to talk for?
About it's only 3 verses. Let's say about 4 minutes. 4 minutes plus 1, 5 minutes.
5 minutes total.
Yeah. Thank you.
5 minutes total, folks. You'll get a minute warning.
I'm going to read this before you disappear. I'm going to put it up in front of you if I can. Oh, you can see it already.
Yeah, we can see it.
The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah. See, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight.
On your screen is going to be a dialogue box. It's going to invite you to join a group, to join a breakout room. Click yes or accept. I can't remember what the dialogue box says. Happy conversations, folks. Good stuff.
I'll do a time check with you and just see that it is now 7 minutes to 8.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Well, at least that's what I have. That's what my device tells me. So.
Excellent, Adrian. Well done.
Thanks, Tricia. Are there 2 of you, Tricia?
There are. You get twice the value. I wanted just to run through who the participants were on my iPad while still being on the screen. For the first half up to the break, I couldn't see the shared screen, and then it suddenly started working.
Oh.
So I'm not sure. I assume that what's been live streamed was okay, so your recording will be all right, but I don't know whether the Zoom recording,
our live stream recording will be immediately viewable on our YouTube channel, so we'll be able to sort something out. And if you're watching on YouTube, there are a few viewers watching right now. It's great to have you. We will come back. Everyone has gone into breakout rooms to have a small conversation about this first 3 verses of Mark. And our encouragement to you is to maybe type into the chat or to chat with those who are with you. What strikes you about these first 3 verses? As we're here, it strikes me that the prophet Isaiah, like as it is written in the prophet Isaiah, there's an assumption there. Because there's no, people would have known who the prophet Isaiah is. Like it's written in such a way, because if you said the prophet Barry or something to us now, people would be, what? Who is this weirdo?
Yes.
So there's an assumption there.
And Isaiah was one of the sort of the really, really key texts of the Old Testament, one of the great prophets. And so, yes, absolutely. But their biblical literacy was just so far superior to, I wouldn't say ours, but to the average person nowadays. So, yeah, as soon as he says, as written in the prophet Isaiah, people will bring to mind what that means. And when it goes on and says, see, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, prepare your way, certainly in the room there would have been people who would have just said straight away, oh, well, that's Malachi 3 verse 1, and yeah.
Yeah. There's particular import in those words, aren't there?
Yeah, it's the prologue in a sense. So it's not only setting it up as gospel in response to Roman gospel, but at the same time he's also, remember, he's just writing a book, and he has to kind of justify in a sense that this is in the tradition of Scripture, because it's not Scripture he's writing. So he wants to show that this is continuous with the Old Testament, that Jesus follows in the footsteps of the old prophets. This is a continuation of God's Old Testament project, if you like, or God's ongoing project for the world.
That's so interesting. Is there a significance in the fact that Mark is comparatively short compared to the other synoptic gospels, so with Matthew and Luke? Because an awful lot of the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, they're huge books. There's so much stuff in them, and yet Mark's gospel is, it's 15 chapters.
Compact, to the point, 16 chapters, yeah. And I think part of what was easy for Luke and Matthew was they were building on what Mark had already done. So they had this core body that they were just able to, well, we would say plagiarize, but not quite, yeah. And so they were able to adapt it, to edit it, that sort of thing. Perhaps that gave them more scope to write more. But what is important to remember is that the message as we have it in Mark is the whole story. Mark hasn't said, oh, I will tell you a little bit about Jesus and then someone else will write something later on. What he has presented to us as the gospel of Jesus Christ is in his understanding the whole of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Folks, welcome back from your breakout rooms. Adrian and I were just having a little bonus chat to the folks on having our own little breakout room with those who are on YouTube. Welcome back, Adrian. It is over to you.
So, do you want to just share? We're not going to have a full discussion immediately. I just want to tell me what in that passage stands out for you, and I'm going to try and highlight it on the screen, and then we'll go back and talk about it. Anyone? Anything in particular?
The fact that a messenger will have to precede Jesus, that being John the Baptist.
Okay. All right.
It's a long line in history.
A long line of history. Sorry, say a bit more about that. Where do you see that?
There obviously is a messenger in a long line of messengers.
Okay. All right. Something else?
It was a strange place to start. Why start there? It's the beginning. the messenger, the Old Testament prophecy. Why is that the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Right. What else?
Because it's good news. That's it, it's the good news.
Okay, so there's this word gospel, which in some translations is good news. Yes.
He mentions Isaiah pretty soon.
Yeah.
He's flagging up a real message there, mentioning their greatest prophet that they would all know and remember. And it's kudos.
In fact, Brian on YouTube mentions that, and Helen in the chat in the Zoom call mentions Isaiah as well, and how Isaiah gives credence, like there's weight coming with Isaiah's name to Mark's writing.
I don't know what the hierarchy was among the prophets, but certainly Isaiah was way up there amongst the prophets that were held in esteem. Yeah.
But the part of the quote is from Malachi.
Oh, isn't that interesting, eh? Yeah, can I change my marker color easily? Yeah. So this quotation here, if you can see my marker, that quotation there is not from Isaiah, that's from Malachi. Malachi 3 verse 1. Yeah. And this lower quotation, where's that from? Anyone?
That's Isaiah.
That's Isaiah. Well done. Yeah.
Isaiah 40 verse 3.
Well done.
There's also,
okay.
There's also the There's also the implication that action is needed, that people have to prepare the way of the Lord and make his paths straight.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Oh, I can almost write like this. That looks horrible. I'll never do that again.
Mark,
okay.
I was going further back that we actually begin with the word beginning, which is as the first word of the book of Genesis.
The first word of the book of Genesis. Okay, yeah. In the Greek translation, those two words are the same. The first word of Genesis in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the first word of Mark's Gospel is arche. In the beginning would almost be a good translation of the first word in Mark's Gospel, because it is there to bring us to mind Genesis 1 verse 1. So there's an interesting mix of things that you've picked up in these three verses, because there's the in the beginning start to the gospel, almost as if Mark is wanting us to ask, is this a new beginning?
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the question. But then he also doesn't want us to think this, he's explicitly saying this is not something new. Remember, he didn't sit down and say, oh, now I'm going to write a new piece of scripture. We'd never have done that. But he does want to show explicitly that this gospel of Jesus Christ is a continuation of the Old Testament, or continuation of the story and the project of God through the Old Testament. And so he speaks about, verse 2 there, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah. So and then he goes on and he quotes another Old Testament prophet, Malachi, and then he goes and he quotes a passage from Isaiah again, Isaiah 40 verse 3. But tell me, so what he's saying is this story is consistent with the Old Testament. It's a continuation of the Old Testament. This Jesus is a part of what God has started and has always been doing in the world, just like the prophet Isaiah wrote about. So what did the prophet Isaiah write about?
Suffering servant?
Suffering servant, yeah. Certainly that's part of what he wants you to bring to mind. And we'll see there are other bits of it as well. It's not just that. But the story of God getting involved in the world for the recreation of the world, through the suffering servant is a part of what Mark wants to bring to mind.
And the distinctive character traits of this Saviour, this Messiah, all his qualities Isaiah goes into.
And this new world, Rachel, that Isaiah speaks about, where the lion will lie down with the lamb, or the lamb will lie down with the lion. Yeah. They lie down with each other. Or the baby will play with a snake and it won't be harmed. These wonderful images of peace and of gentleness. You know, if the flame is busy dying, this suffering servant won't just come and extinguish it. Or if the reed is sort of bruised and broken like that, he's not just going to snap it off. Wow, that's really gentle. It's a real story of peace. And that's the background of, Mark would have it, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
There's also the promise of salvation in Isaiah, and for people struggling under the Romans, it must have come out as good news for them to think that God was going to actually intervene and help them out of this situation, give them back their country.
So there's this image, we'll get to it next week, I think we'll touch on it, where Isaiah says, you know what, the time is coming when God is just going to step into history, and you had better watch out if you're on the wrong side. God is going to come with his blazing angels and all the violence you can imagine. Their heels are just going to melt away like they're wax in front of the presence of Almighty God. And God is coming into history to straighten up this mess that is in this world. Isaiah says, part of Isaiah says, that is what is going to happen. So if you are living on the wrong side of history, that does sound like good news. If you're downtrodden and oppressed, it's good news that God is going to come and uplift the bottom half or more of society. Yeah? I want to touch on something you didn't highlight, but I want to highlight, and that is this, at the end of verse 1, Mark describes Jesus as the Christ. That's the Messiah. We know that image. That's this person who's going to come and transform the nation and the world and put them in their right place, so to speak. But he describes Jesus as also as the Son of God. Now that's a really interesting image, and in part that ties to the Roman Empire and the Caesars, who described themselves as sons of God. What we slip into and misunderstand sometimes is that we understand son as meaning some kind of genetic term in some way, or a lineage thing like begat. And that's not really what it's about at all. It's not so much particularly first about family as it is about likeness and values. So to describe someone as the Son of God would be to say, this is someone in who is the fullness of God, or in who is the fullness of God's values. We do a similar thing in English. We say, hey, he's his father's boy. Hey, he's like his father. That's his father's. Well, obviously it's his father's son. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying this is someone who, in which, in this case, we can closely see what God is like, the Son of God. That becomes a really high calling towards the end of the New Testament, where we're told as Christians that we can call ourselves children of God. That's a high calling in this context. If Jesus is Son of God, let's learn from him. Let's accept what he says and teaches and live our lives accordingly. Anything else?
One of the things that we said was that, first of all, the messenger comes that God is sending, and then it's about us acting from what the messenger tells us to prepare the way.
Okay.
God acts first, sending the messenger, and then we have to act.
Right, right. And so this idea of messenger, we'll see, comes up again in two other places in Mark's gospel as a really important part of what is happening here. But as a part of it, there is, as you say, there is this call to action. There's this call to do something. And we're not going to get to verse 4 today, but when we get into verse 4 and up to 13 and then beyond to the fishers of men story, we'll see that in this prologue is this hint of something about to happen. And in the coming verses of the chapter, there's just this constant drumbeat that just get ready for it. God is on the move. Something is happening here, and it's a call to you as much as to everyone else to say, will you be a part of what God is doing? Are you going to join with Jesus in being a part of God's plan to put this world right and to set it up right? That's the challenge that he puts to us. This is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as prophesied through the Old Testament. As part of that prophecy, this ongoing thing of saying, God is about to act. God is a God of justice. The unjust can't get away with it forever. At some point, God is going to act. Will you join him in what he's doing? I'm going to leave it there for tonight, unless you've got anyone else wants to add something.
I'd quite like to comment on why the path's straight. Is that something specially to do with the paths in the Holy Land, or is it a picture path?
The answer to your question is very unsatisfying. The answer is yes. So, but it's a great question, Ruth. It's a great question, Ruth, because if the road is straight and flat, okay, and it's flat, the path is straight, then in Palestine it's relatively safe. You can see what's coming, you can see what's happening. Now think of this guy lying by the side of the road in Luke, in the story of the Samaritan. And what has happened there, the path is like this.
Right.
And so there's plenty of place for people to hide. Okay.
Right. Yes.
So in the history, in the geography in which they live, this makes a bit of sense. But at the same time, I think there's something else here. Isn't there something just about being straight, about justice and honesty, and just maybe some kind of call for us to be on paths that are straight? And that, I think that play on the words is deliberate. I think it's there. I don't think I'm just adding something that Mark didn't think about.
No.
There was someone else who was going to say something.
I just wanted to ask which version of the Bible, which Bible you were using.
So
yeah.
Are you going to be at the coffee group tomorrow afternoon?
Me, no.
Okay, can I not answer your question now?
Okay.
Is that all right? Is that okay? I will answer your question, but not tonight.
Delayed gratification.
And I think there was still one more person.
I wanted a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Earlier, you said that there's nothing in the gospel that doesn't have some meaning, but you might not yet have known what it is. Is there not some case for saying we've lost bits where we've lost bits in translation? I'm just questioning the authenticity of every word in Mark's gospel coming to us as it was written?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I can't see everyone, so I didn't catch your name, but
My name's Anne.
Anne, really good question. So we don't want to take an approach to the gospel that wants to ascribe some kind of magic to it. And I'm not saying that as we have it in English, every single word is exactly as it should be. Certainly, as Mark and his community wrote it, they chose every word carefully like that. So when, for example, he says at the feeding, one of the feeding miracles, he says they sat down on green grass. He specifically mentions green grass, which is quite unusual in Palestine. Why does he mention green grass? He wants you to bring to mind one of the Psalms. Lord is my shepherd. And so he creates that link. Okay? So it's not to say, I'm not saying that the English translation is perfect or anything, but certainly in the ideas that are put in there, we will find that there is meaning behind them that is important. I think we'll also find there are odd places where the translation into English has perhaps been clumsy, or at times, if you're reading in the NIV version in particular, sometimes the theology of the translator comes to the fore more than the original Greek does. And so we need to be careful of things like that. Has that answered your question? At least in part?
Yes, thank you.
Can we leave it there for tonight? I think we're on -1 minute.
Thank you, Adrian. That's been hugely interesting this evening. Thank you so much.
Just to make you aware, folks, two things. First of all, tomorrow you can have coffee with Adrian, obviously in a Zoom room, in a Zoom conversation. I've put into the chat the meeting ID and the passcode that you need. You can find it, just copy and paste it here. And if you think, wow, that was meaty and I need to get into that again, this video will be immediately available on YouTube. The link is just above the coffee information that I just pasted in. You can click this link. That'll mean that you'll join the live stream, but eventually when we stop live streaming, you will be able to go and rewatch. Is there anything else that we want to say?
I want to make one more recommendation to you for the coming week. I hope it doesn't sound burdensome. I really don't think it is. If you get the chance, why don't you read through Mark's Gospel in one sitting rather. See if you can read it through from beginning to end as one piece of writing as it was intended. If that's too much, try split it in half, read the first 8 chapters and the second 8 chapters. But it's really not very long, and I think it will give you a good overview of the story. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the evening with you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We end by just saying the grace together. I know it will sound a lovely jumble, but let's go for it.
Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ,
Love of God,
love of God,
fellowship of the Holy Spirit,
with
us all forevermore. Amen.
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 Bless you. Go well.
Go safely.
Bye-bye.
We hope to see you next week.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube, folks.
Bye.
See you again next week.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Candace.
Bye.
Bye.